Imagine a community in your state where low-income, Black, Indigenous, and people of color win equitable investments from government to transform their neighborhoods, creating communities full of parks and accessible public transportation, fully funded schools and youth development programs, and health, housing, and other services that people need. Hi, I'm Jackie Guerrero, Equity and Community Investments Director at Catalyst, California. The vision we just imagined together drives the Budget Power Project. The Budget Power Project boosts the power of BIPOC communities to engage in public budget processes. In this Spark Talk, we'll describe how budget advocacy builds community voice and power. You'll get an overview of the Budget Power Project, and we'll provide some recommendations for how philanthropy can invest in local organizations to engage in budget advocacy. Engaging in public budget processes, especially with a vision of racial justice, requires long-term investments in community organizing, policy advocacy, action research, and coalition infrastructure. This is what's necessary for racial justice organizers to ensure local, state, and federal funding is allocated equitably. And there's no more important time for this work. Many communities throughout the country have received large infusions of funding, billions of dollars, through the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Package, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Here in California, there's also funding from initiatives from the state's own revenue streams. But the combination of inflation, forecasted economic softening, and rising interest rates are creating an austerity narrative that will cause debates to focus on cuts instead of investments. The Budget Power Project helps racial justice and power-building organizations strengthen their budget advocacy and advance equity narratives using data. These organizations then elevate the voices of high-need residents in budget decision-making, leading to more economically stable and thriving communities. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Carla Zombro of Million Voters Project, to talk about how budget advocacy builds community.
Thank you, Jackie. As Jackie mentioned, I'm Carla Zombro. I'm with the Million Voters Project, and we're one of the partners of the Budget Power Project. And we're part of BPP because fighting racial injustice means a major commitment of public dollars, and that requires power. We work with community organizations who have long been at the cutting edge, running innovative policy campaigns, organizing massive voter engagement programs. But when the battle is all over, we're consistently told, sorry, there's actually not any money to do that. So BPP is about taking the folks that are most impacted and moving funding to where it's most needed and where it can actually have the biggest impact. This can also mean moving money away from where it's not needed, like the carceral state or tax cuts for the wealthiest corporations. Our imperative with BPP and with the Million Voters Project is to build and assert community leadership in the decision-making about how our tax dollars get spent. We need to make sure that taxes and spending reflect community values. There's a backdrop to all of this. California has a long history of systematic disinvestment in communities of color, and it's going to take more than one organization or even one region, and definitely more than one budget cycle to actually reverse course. So when we started off designing the Budget Power project, the first thing we did was we spoke with 65 organizations all over the state to learn what they need in order to participate in budget advocacy and win. And there were 6 major themes. The first one was that organizations need strategic, ongoing funding in order to grow the bench of dedicated staff that lead budget advocacy. This type of work, it happens year-round, and you need staff who are on it all year round and don't have to also do the fundraising and also do the member event, but actually really stay focused on this work. They need to be able to mobilize people, not just in emergency response mode, but to actually be in proactive mode, get in front of the budget cycle. And this isn't something you can just do part-time. So the second thing that folks talked about was the need to align on a shared narrative and a shared strategy. And we need to increase the bench of narrative strategists who can deliver consistent, timely communications programming at scale. So we can have an air game and can actually control the message around budgets and around our communities. The next thing was folks really asked for training and technical assistance. We need to build expertise and muscle memory, especially because organizations are working sometimes at the state, but largely at the county, at the city, at school districts. And so budget advocacy it requires understanding how these very complex processes work, and they're very different at all these different levels, so that peer learning and that expertise can actually be developed over time, and training and technical assistance is a really key piece of that. The other thing that we heard from folks and that we often see in these budget battles is we need multi-sector coalitions across issue areas, across sectors, in order to actually have the impact we need. We oftentimes will otherwise get pitted against each other in these budget fights if we're not coming in as a united front. And tied to that is we need dedicated capacity to the actual coalition organizing, helping folks build the alignment, the relationships, and practices to actually make decisions together and move nimbly and impactfully together. The next is and the final thing, last but not least, is we got to keep the lights on. We need operational infrastructure. That's from program coordination to technology to just the basic funding to carry out all these different pieces of work that I described before. So when we support community organizations, when we support residents and youth with training, that helps really demystify this really what might seem complicated and inaccessible arena of budget and policy. And it also makes sure that people of color are not just involved, but leading policy-making decisions that are actually impacting their neighborhoods. So for more about the who, as well as the what of the Budget Power Project, I'm going to turn it back to Jackie.
Thanks, Carla. 3 organizations joined to create the Budget Power Project: the California Budget and Policy Center, Catalyst California, and Million Voters Project, or MVP. Our 3 organizations, in turn, work with an alliance of powerful state-based networks and statewide coalitions representing over 120 organizations and coalitions working towards racial justice. In response to the capacity building needs we uncovered in the survey Carla referred to, we have 4 program areas. Capacity building, where we equip organizations with the budget and advocacy tools necessary to win sustainable public investments. We do this through a mix of larger group trainings, individual technical assistance to organizations, and periodic strategy sessions. Research and analysis. We provide one-on-one budget research and analysis to develop policy, shape campaign demands, and support equity narratives. Organizing and campaigning. As you heard before, many times organizations don't have dedicated staff to focus on budget equity work. The Budget Power Project provides 2-year subgrants to organizations to help scale up their budget campaign efforts. Narrative and storytelling. This is a very important part of our work, developing compelling, aligned narratives and communication strategies that support our racial justice agenda, as opposed to the folks who tend to control the narrative about our communities. Now that you've seen how community-based organizations, advocates, and residents can engage in public budgeting processes, you may wonder, what role can philanthropy play, and how? If you aren't already, educate your foundations about supporting organizations that do budget advocacy work and community organizing, as well as intermediaries that provide budget capacity building. It's also important to remember that budget capacity building and budget advocacy take time. Multi-year funding helps ensure that advocates build their skills and knowledge and allows for budget advocacy campaigns to generate results, which often take more than one budget cycle. It can take multiple attempts for an organization to first understand the political processes of how the budget gets adopted, and then secondly, to figure out what the change or policy or campaign should be. These are hard systems to understand. They're very insular, which is intentional. And while this kind of capacity building and advocacy is resource intensive, it can have a huge payoff. You are strengthening community power to transform neighborhoods. Thank you for taking the time to learn about the Budget Power Project. Please contact us if you have any questions. Thank you.